about it.
Oh no, did we lose David?
No, he just moved.
No, I just moved.
Okay, we're definitely live, I think.
I think we're live. It says live.
Yes, it does.
And if somebody in the comments could confirm whether we are in fact live, that would be really helpful right now.
And that you can hear us well, all those fun things that happen in a professionally videoed environment.
You can tell already, everyone, that we're having fun with this. And that's the tone we're going to set for the day. Yeah, technology has not been kind to us over the last half an hour. And we'll tell you all about that a little bit later. We are live. Mike says we're live, and Richard has confirmed it. Thanks, both.
Oh, good.
So let's get started. You'll notice something wrong because there's only 2 panelists, and there's supposed to be 3. So that's one of the tech problems we've been having. Nick has been in and out. And we hope he'll be back in again shortly. But look, this is a time of crisis. And I think if we can't roll with this and have fun and make the most of what we've got, then we shouldn't be up here in the first place. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to look down here and invite Nick every few seconds. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us, particularly in a time when work life is merged with personal life. Every hour of the day is precious, and giving an hour to spend with us, we really appreciate. We hope we're going to give you great value for that. We've tried very hard to do so. Even in a regular year, do you remember those? Even in a regular year, hundreds of people from across the industry work their socks off to try and make TMRE, the market research event, a big deal. And every year there's change, uncertainty, innovation, and we need to come together as a group to share and to learn, to inspire each other and to challenge each other. And obviously this year more than ever, we need to be doing that. And in the spirit of that, in the spirit of the craziness of the situation, we didn't want to wait until the market research event for everything. And so we've brought some conversations forward, and we're going to have them over the next few weeks and months in the run up to the event. This is the first. Bear with us on the tech side. And please give us suggestions and feedback as you go. For this first conversation, we want to talk about the situation we're in, talk about how research teams and leaders are adapting to that situation. We've brought together 3 experts to help you think about that. We can learn from how they're dealing with this situation. We can learn from the challenges that they're facing. So super kind, super smart experts. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. Hopefully the third will also join us, rejoin us for the 5th time in a minute. But let me talk first about how this is going to go. As you can tell, informal and fun. We picked this platform, which is awesome if people's internet connections work, which is awesome because it allows so much interactivity. We can all see your comments flowing on the screen, and we'll do our best to read them as we go through, so mind our eyes wandering. There's a space in there to type questions. You should type questions, and you should vote up questions if you've got anything you want the panel to make sure they address. Questions, comments, all very welcome. Let's make this as interactive as possible. In that spirit, this platform allows us to invite you on stage with us. Yay! If you're interested. So before I take a question, what I'll do is to click invite on stage. And if you're interested, no pressure. If you're interested, click accept, you'll appear and your audio will appear. And you can ask the question almost in real life. And you can engage in more of a conversation. So we want this to be super interactive. And let's have that vibe all the way through. So put your camera and your mic on if you're interested in that and click yes. If you do nothing, you will not appear on stage. So don't worry if you're in your pajamas right now. That's totally okay. We're going to broadly go through 5 topics during this. How can we be effective when we're not in the office? How can we lead our businesses during this crazy time of massive disruption? Number 3, how is consumer behavior changing during this period? Number 4, what's changed for good? What's changed in a more temporary fashion? And finally, last but not least, how has this changed the kind of teams and capabilities that we need? Roughly that topic. I expect lots of questions and comments that will thoroughly derail us onto much more exciting topics as we go through. If not, they're a pretty good set of questions and discussions to have. So with no further ado, can I ask the panel to introduce themselves one by one? And I'm going to look down here and try and get Nick back on again, just in time, hopefully. Charity, do you want to say hi first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Charity Dantiscayo. I am a corporate vice president at New York Life. I've been with the company for just over 3 years. Before I was there, I was in financial services at American Express in their Insights group. And before that, I was at Time Inc., also in their Insights group. I'm happy to be here today with all of you.
And hi, everyone. I'm Christina Speck. And I head up our innovation lab at Mass Mutual. Before that, I was with Aetna, running Apple partnership marketing. Before that, I was at Hasbro, doing very different things from insurance, like movies. And before that, I was at DuPont. And before that, I was in advertising. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
Wonderful. It's so good to have you both. And we had such wonderful conversations in the run to this event. I can't wait to share some of that with everybody else. And third, we also got Nick, who will hopefully be joining us shortly. He was on and off internet problems. Not sure what the root cause is, but I lost power last week for 48 hours. Someone I was talking to earlier in Brooklyn had lost their power a couple of days ago to something else. California's got power outages. So
right.
Power outages and internet outages are the norm these days, and we're going to roll with it. So hopefully Nick will join, and Amanda from TMRE is going to give me a hand and try and get Nick on while we have the conversation.
Oh,
hi! I'm back. Oh my
great.
goodness.
And the quality looks great.
That's good, because we actually have real internet now, which is exciting.
Great.
Would you like to introduce yourself, the star of the show, the most talked about man?
Obviously, the person who wasn't actually here. Yes, hi everybody, Nick Graham. I head up the Consumer Insights Analytics team for Pepsi's US beverages business.
Wonderful. Right, great to have you all. Let's dive right in. I think the first topic we want to spend some time on is how can we be most effective when we're not in the office? I can't wait to learn from all your experiences. Maybe Christina, how have you found remote working, and what tips do you have for people during this time?
Yeah, so David, our situation was really interesting because my whole team was remote before we went into COVID. Before that happened, before the pandemic, we were already working remote. But what has happened with COVID is now all our colleagues and clients are too. So I would say two things happened. One, there is more empathy for people that used to work from home. You always felt like you sort of weren't doing enough. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me,
Yes,
David?
yes,
I don't know.
yes.
Charity, Nick? It felt like it cut out on me. Oops.
Yeah, no, we could hear you. It was a bit of feedback, but keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what changed for us is with the whole company working from home, we actually started having mandated policies that really helped with our own effectiveness. So for example, we have no meetings Fridays now. So there's actually time for us to get the work done. We have company-wide a half-hour lunch break that we can take or use to talk to a client or just use to get to take a walk and get some fresh air. And the other thing we have is we have the ability to turn our cameras off. That was one of the things that was so I felt like it added pressure for the teams because you always felt now that you had to sort of look and feel your best. And it ran contrary to some of the other policies, like bring your best self to work. Even your best self is, if your best self is grouchy that morning, So those are some of the things that we did.
I've always struggled with that tension between bring yourself to work and the need to, fit in and be very professional. It's fascinating to hear how that's impacted things. Charity, when we talked, you talked a lot about how your relationship with your team was changing over this time.
Yes.
I wonder if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So New York Life is a very face-to-face sort of environment. So we didn't really work virtually for an extended period of time before this happened. Certainly with travel for conferences and focus groups, we're a team that understands how to operate in a virtual world because, we're kind of have to, right? But I think what I was observing is that, perhaps not everyone in the organization was in that same place. And so I think we've all had that experience of being on calls and nobody says anything. And that's a little unnerving sometimes because you don't know if you've got the engagement or the interaction. So there's a couple of things. One is I did shift weekly research and insights team updates to be Zoom calls so that we can see each other. I think it also is nice to kind of just see the team, check in, see how everybody's doing, have a little bit of that time squared away to do that. And then also in terms of sharing out, insights, presentations, and all of that kind of stuff, we did a bit more of a pre-read situation where we would send materials and then set up time afterwards via video conference and talk about it, because it was a way to ensure that people were looking at the material, absorbing, and then having that time to have dialogue and not just, it's already hard enough to sit through a presentation when you're face to face, but I found that in a virtual environment, it's even harder. I think obviously there's a time and space for that, so we definitely had to do that. One other thing that I sort of started within our broader strategy center is virtual water coolers. So because we didn't have the time where you're running into each other at a water cooler, at the pantry, at the elevator, it's scheduled time, a half hour plus, whoever wants to stay on, every Friday, pre-summer, and now in the summer we do it on Thursdays. So it's just a nice and sort of informal way for us to connect, talk about work, not talk about work, see how everybody's doing, et cetera. It's just a way to stay connected, but it had to be more planful about it.
I was going to say, I think on that, I think when this first happened, we all started doing Zoom happy hours, and we started doing all of these events to bring everyone together. And I think sort of naively, we thought just organically everyone would manage that. And I think that, to your point, it very quickly became obvious that we needed to plan and organize, and that sometimes those Zoom happy hours or those Zoom meetings are great for things, and sometimes they're not. And I think we've learned an accelerated pace in the last 6 months. So, for example, I think similar to your experiences, one thing we learned is those kind of big Zoom meetings, they're not necessarily great places to have lots of dialogue, right? Because sometimes, particularly as we have a remote team as well, they're all remote now, but they were some of them remote before, that actually not everybody knows each other. Maybe not everybody's comfortable kind of speaking up or speaking and interacting in those sessions. So exactly as you're saying, we've set up, we have a happy hour, which is a bit more informal, and people can just bring, here's some fun stuff. It doesn't necessarily feel as formal. We have a Yammer channel so that people can just post random stuff that they're seeing or doing, the sourdough that they made this weekend, the puppy that they bought, or whatever it might be, right? So that there's still sort of this more informal connection. And then I think a great thing that one of the teams has done was they were really missing the interaction because they used to sit together. And so one of the things they did, maybe it's a bit like your water cooler idea, is they just put Zoom on for a couple of hours on I think it's every other morning, and they just have it on in the background. So it's like they're sitting with one another, but there's no pressure to have to talk. It's just like, oh, hey, did you see that thing last night on wherever, or have you seen this thing on Netflix? And then they just get on with their work. So it's trying to recreate the work environment. And honestly, it was something I hadn't even thought of, but I thought it was a brilliant piece of innovation.
It's fascinating how the spontaneity, creativity, and unplanned nature of the work environment can actually be recreated with a bit of formality and a bit of scheduled times and blocks of times. It's a really interesting solution. And have you found pushback to any of these? Are there any people who are struggling with this still? And do we need to do extra work to try and bring everybody with us on this journey? Or
I'll just say briefly, and then Nick, of course. I think there are people with tech issues. I mean, it's funny, I have a few colleagues who, especially if you're in a New York apartment building and you're sharing, the same grid as 100 or so other people, that gets to be a little bit challenging. So sometimes there's like some people just call in, and I think that's okay. But I think it's helpful to just understand where people are coming from. And inevitably you have people who are just never going to join. And that's okay. But I think it's helpful to have the option.
And I like what Nick said about having your natural background, your home, or your kids. We actually, the teams have been having a lot of fun with the virtual Zoom backgrounds, and they're kind of interesting because they're perfect as long as you stay still like a robot. As soon as you move a little bit, there's this kind of like this animation GIF thing that happens that you don't want, unintentional, that sort of leers his head. And so we've been having a lot of fun with what is that now? When people use that background. So, but we're going to try, I think, just the natural background. It's okay if your house is a mess, go for it.
It's funny how people still sort of feel sometimes they have to apologize for kids interrupting or dogs barking. And I'm like, no, like this is reality now, right? This is the work environment we're now in. And it's kind of, I don't know, if I feel like it's been really important, I think, through this journey to give people explicit permission. I think sometimes I just assumed, certainly at the beginning, that everyone knew it was going to be okay because that was the environment we were in. There was no choice. And I think you quickly realize, certainly for some folks, it's just really important to explicitly say, by the way, it's like they might say, oh, I'm so sorry, my kids are being noisy today. I'm like, no, it's absolutely fine. Like that's absolutely okay. And as you both were saying, I think a big piece has been giving people permission not to put their cameras on, right? There's this feeling that you always have to be on camera. And I said, look, sometimes it's great. Just join one of the calls and go for a walk around the block while you're listening. Like, that's fine as well.
In the spirit of that, Kathy, I hope you didn't feel the pressure to put your camera on when I invited you, but you made a really thoughtful comment in the chat. And so I wondered if you wanted to tell the group about that and how you've done that in your business.
Yeah, we did a family feud, company feud, if you will. And Dan and Leon, our senior leaders, sent out like this questionnaire, and we all filled it out. And then we broke up into teams and we had groups chatting, and it was really a Q&A about each other. And it was so much fun. We had people, of course, the competitive nature we all have. We're all just kind of keeping points and who was ahead and who knew more about other people. We laughed. It was a really, really, really good way to connect with everybody. It was a lot of fun.
That's such a good idea. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Love it.
And then also, thank you so much. You're our first guest on screen. Yay! It's working. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And just to Kathy's point, the other thing we've tried is, and again, I have a gaming background, but Who Knew is a really nice game to get people, comfortable and break the ice. So I dug it out of my basement and we did that one day. And that's another thing. I think games are another thing that we started and then we somehow stopped. So thank you, Kathy.
That's a good idea. We did a little version of that. We got people just to do like one pages on themselves and things people might not know about them. And that was amazingly interesting. Like people would just share, hey, I learned this weird language in school, or I love trekking up mountains. And it's amazing. A whole hour of happy hour could go by as just dissecting the interesting things that they shared.
And it's so hard to make time for these things in the real world.
Right.
But it's so fascinating that we've focused the mind and made time for them now when the world's even more crazy than it used to be. We wonder why we never did this before, I guess.
Yeah. Karen asked a really good question here about the difference. I don't know if you were going to ask that, David, about whether there's difference. Oh, here she is. Here she is. This is exciting.
I wasn't expecting to be on camera, so I'm looking a little cash here, but that's okay, right?
Absolutely.
All okay.
Bring on the kids and the pets and the chaos. We wondered if you wanted to ask a question.
Oh, yeah. So, yes, I'm wondering, and actually, we're about to kick off our own little research initiative. I'm not a researcher, I run a recruitment firm, but we want to tap into sort of particularly early mid-career people and how they do. I was wondering if you've seen a difference between the way early mid-career professionals are dealing with this, colleagues and people on your team, versus people maybe who are a bit more experienced, who have gone through a crisis in the past. And if so, what are you doing to support them and sort of keep up morale and also, you know, give them a vision for the future?
Great question. Over to the panel of experts.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it a little bit goes back to something that Nick had said, where it's like, or maybe you wrote it, where it was giving people the space to talk about where they are and how they're feeling. I think as a, you know, early mid-career professional, you're still building your confidence in yourself, in, you know, your abilities and your skills. And maybe you don't feel as comfortable saying, I need time and space to do that. You know, there's a little bit of, you know, hesitance to say, I need permission to do this thing, take this appointment, you know, like kind of establishing yourself. And I think it's helpful to just say and acknowledge, you know, hey, if you need to do something in the middle of the day because there's less people at the grocery store, there's, you know, so that's actually something that I've said to my team, which is like, if you need to like go to the drugstore, go to the grocery store, mid-afternoon is a really good time to do that. So just block your calendar, make me aware so that I know you're not going to be around. Like, they're responsible people. And I think it also shows that you have faith in them and trust them to, you know, do their jobs and do it well, but carve out some time for themselves.
Yep. That's great.
The other thing, I think you're absolutely right, and I think explicitly giving that permission and saying it's okay to make this work for you, and you're going to have to change your work-life schedule. And I was just talking to one of my team the other day and saying no one is expecting you can just continue to live the 9 to 5 or whatever that is, right, in this new normal. Yeah. I think one thing that's not surprised me necessarily, but that struck me is it's not as simple as sort of more junior, less experienced, more experience in terms of the divide. It feels quite, and I'll say this as a researcher, right? It feels much more granular and complex than that. So I've got some people, sometimes it's support network. So some of my team, whatever their experience, just don't have a great support network. And so I think have struggled more just from loneliness, right? That mental health element, the lack of socialization has been a real challenge. And then I think you've got some people who are thriving with kids at home and some people who are really, really struggling. And it's so personal. And so I go back to what Charity says. I think the most important thing for me through this has been just having those one-on-one conversations and saying, I know it's like such a trope now, but genuinely, how are you doing? And it's okay that you're not doing okay, regardless of what your circumstances are. You know, I've got some junior folks who are worried about their career, and then I've got some really experienced people who've maybe been through multiple crises who are in exactly the same place. So it's just so personal.
Yeah, empathy, right? I think is so important right now. Yeah.
Empathy, and even when sometimes it doesn't feel rational, but it's just understanding where they're coming from and why they feel what they feel. And I know sometimes you can try and offer reassurance, and sometimes you can't. You can just listen and say, just let it out. And we can't solve it because some of it is not within our control, right? But just listening to people, feeling that they have a safe space where they can say all of that, right, and express that, I think is so important.
Do you mind if I just throw out another add-on here? So have you found that any people are considering a career change or thinking about leaving, or because they've got, you know, now they've got to worry about young kids, you know, the whole dynamic has changed and they feel it's much harder to balance work and kids, and obviously kids being out of school? Do you feel like there's any evidence of that in the insight space at all? or taking a leave of absence or anything like that?
It wasn't in my team, but we actually had one of our cross-functional team. She left last week, and that was, I think she'd been thinking about it for a while, but it was less because of the logistics of COVID, right? And looking after kids. It was more that this was a good moment. She was like, if there's a moment when I'm going to make a change, this is the moment. So I've seen a little bit of that, of people saying, this is such a disruption that if I've been thinking about making a change, it's been a bit of an accelerant to that. To your specific question, though, I don't know if anybody's necessarily, maybe they haven't told me, made that decision, but I think you can see a lot of people asking questions about what the future is going to look like. So I get lots of questions about what is it going to look like in the office if my kids can't go back to school, or if they do go back to school, is the office going to be open? So people are obviously having those. I wouldn't be surprised if those conversations will come up.
Right, right.
Thanks so much, Karen.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Very good of you to come up and help this
thing
along.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
We've lost somebody, but
we lost Christina. Sorry.
Amanda, if you could, in the background, if you could try and help get Christina back on, that would be amazing. In the meantime, why don't we move on to another topic? How is this helping us or challenging us in how we lead our businesses? And maybe Charity, like, there's an immense leadership challenge right now in Insight, but is this a good or a bad thing for our profession, do you think?
I think it's giving us the space. Oh, she's back, yay. I think that what we have is the space to expand our audience, right? So I think that because we can come forth with data and insights from a multitude of sources. So, all of the polling companies publish a tracker, like the majority of them are publishing a tracker. Pew has put forth some very interesting perspectives, as has McKinsey. And so to be able to package that alongside our own primary research, serve that up to our colleagues and to our leadership, puts us in a different light, invites us into conversations that, perhaps might have taken a little bit longer to get to because of the importance of understanding what's happening right now. And also being able to connect, behaviors and changes. That's my son who knows that I'm on this call.
Was I not supposed to do that?
No, but anyway.
You should have him come say hello.
Would you like to say hello to the 90 people on this call?
That's a lot of people.
Come on. Just say
hi.
Anyway, yeah, so he just ate breakfast / lunch, and he's in my nicest background space. Anyway, like I was saying, I think that we have this wonderful opportunity to show that we are resourceful, right? Like, not only are we doing things, custom for our business, but we're also being mindful of integrating that and showing convergence with many other data sources. And I think that makes us more valuable during this time.
And then Nick, how's this affecting leadership for you and your team?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's never been a more sort of exciting / terrifying time to be in our profession, right? As Charity said, I feel as a team, we've incredibly needed and valued right now, right? Because there's so much changes happening and a lot of it's being driven by consumer or customer behavior. So almost from day zero of this whole set of crises, I should say, people have been coming to the Insights team and saying, what's happening? Why is it happening? What's going to happen next? And so that's it's really exciting. That's I think I said this to you before, David, I feel like we've accelerated the role of the Insights function within the organization by multiple years. So it's a really exciting time, I think, to be part of the business. I think one of the challenges is there's so much data, right? You talked about it, Charity, right? Like there's I'll be honest, the first few weeks of COVID, there was like a new poll, a new survey, a new study every 12 seconds. And I was, and the entire team drowning in data. And so the one thing is there's just so much data. On the other hand, you need to pair that with empathy and understanding of how people are feeling. You need the human element and the data element. So there's just such an overwhelming amount of information that I think passing through all of that, trying to understand really what's going on, what's happening, that, and the second part of that is, it isn't just enough to understand what's happening. Everyone really wants to know what's going to happen next, right? So what behaviors are going to stick? How do we, the phrase running around most of businesses is, how do we come out of this stronger, right? So how do we learn from this? What do we take from this? How do we advantage in the future? And I think as an insights function, that's been a challenge, right? That's why I say it's a terrifying, in inverted commas, moment, because you've got a lot of data. You've got the qualitative and the quantitative side. You're trying to bring together data and empathy, and you're trying to predict the future in a world that's incredibly dynamic. And you have to move fast, right? Because certainly, so it's all of that concentrated at a moment when the spotlight of the business is upon you. It's really been exciting, and I think has given us a real opportunity to show the power of data, to show the power of empathy, to lead from the front. But it's not, that's not without challenges, really. It's been, I think, a testing time for all of us.
And Christina, how have you found championing change or the pace of change during this time?
Yeah, I know. It's like Charity and Nick said, right, David? The best laid plans go awry often, right? And never more so.
Oh no.
Oh dear. Best laid plans is the perfect time to get.
She said it all. She said, I mean, this is it to a T, right?
Well, let's try and get her back on. In the meantime, Carol, I don't know if you're interested in coming on screen to ask your question. I've pushed the button. We'll give you a couple of seconds to accept or decline the invite. In the meantime, if you think a kid walking on is anything kind of a problem, yesterday my kids, my 8-year-old and 10-year-old, both put plasticine in their hair, Play-Doh in their hair, a sticky Play-Doh. They both go to. I had to take it out of their hair on the call before it got even more stuck. So that was a really fun call because we were visuals to see as well. Okay. Carol, hey Carol.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, Carol.
Hello.
Welcome. Would you like to ask a question?
Sure. So I'm seeing that the speed of decision making has been accelerated, which I think is a good thing because I think we probably spent too much time gazing at our navels. My question is how is all of the magnitude of data and insights that you have, how is that factoring into the speed in the decision making, right? Because you could see people making more decisions on gut, or are they making more decisions based on data? And how are those two, speed and data, coming together to make for a better future?
Right.
I guess if it's okay, I'd like to just speak to that from my own experience thus far. Because we have been engaging with partners internally more frequently during this time period, they now have a better understanding of what we can bring to the table. And now that for those partners, there's this sense of, oh, you guys are a good team to help us understand this, that would normally just be an action or a decision or a business idea that would have moved forward without really taking that step to say, is this right? We're seeing this. Here are some of our hypotheses. Here's what we're observing. And now we're part of that conversation to say, okay, you know what? Let's actually look at our full scope of data. Let's work with our analytics team to understand what they've got. Let's look at consumer sentiment data. Let's bring those two things together. Let's understand what we know thus far, and then what else do we need to know? But then, to your point about the rapid pace, we've got deadlines and milestones and meetings that we're trying to, plan against. So it isn't sort of just the, what would be cool kind of situation. It's more like, hey, this is something that we're seeing. Can you help us understand if we have the data set to prove or disprove that this is the case?
Great.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, I think you're absolutely right. It's been a great opportunity to showcase what what the function can do. And I think we've been brought into conversations we would not have easily been brought into before, from finance, supply chain, operations. And so that's a really exciting opportunity for us to bring value to the business. I think one of the things that, exactly to Charity's point about, because we're operating under such tight timeframes, is I think the days of the perfect model and the perfect answer, hopefully, are somewhat behind us, right? Because we all knew there wasn't one, by the way. It's just in the world of trying to de-risk, we tried to get to the perfect answer sometimes, as everybody. And I think what's been a good side effect of this crisis has been is we've had to go with the best possible answer in the time frame that we have, right? And so I think the models we've built, we know they're not perfect. They're never going to be perfect in the normal world, but they're definitely not perfect now because so much is dynamic. But because of that, everyone's willing to go, well, this is the best outcome we can get in this time frame. So let's move with that. So I think it's created a new acceptance of probability, right? Of this is probably 70-80% right, and that's probably the best we can do right now as based on all the data that we have right now.
It's great. It's great.
Well, thanks so much, Carol. Great to meet you.
Thanks for letting me
Good to
join.
see you, Carol.
Yes. I'm so pleased this is working. Mostly.
It's great. I love it. I didn't know we were getting guest stars, but I love it.
We're certainly having fun anyway. Well, I am. Please tell us in the comments if you're also having fun. I want to move on to the topic then of how consumer behavior is changing. What are we learning? What are we observing? What are the new behaviors that we're spotting? Maybe Charity, do you want to tell us what you're seeing in your world?
Yeah. So, and just overall, like as a backdrop of all of this, it's a lot of what we've already discussed, which is what mattered today didn't matter 3 months ago, or what people thought 3 months ago is no longer true or accurate today. So as we've gotten smarter about everything going on, I think that we've, sort of come to understand that perceptions about things are changing and different. One of the things that I was actually talking to one of the managers on my team about was, is the vaccine going to solve everything, right? Like now that we are closer to that sort of place where one is going to be in production, there's now, studies of people saying, I'm not going to get it, right? And there's also like, at the extreme, there's like the anti-vax stuff, right? That's also happening. And it's sort of like, don't confuse those two things, right? Like they're very different. I think that rate of development has been so fast that people are a little scared about it. And that's very different from saying like, I don't believe in it. But it's the sort of thing where it's like, I think 2 months ago, had you asked the question, people would have been like, yeah, I totally. But now that it's a bit of a reality, it's like, well, I don't think I want to be first in line to do that. So, great, it's available, but like, I'm going to wait for others to try it out first before I say I'm going to do it. But, so that's something, that is top of mind for me.
And Christina, what are you seeing in terms of changing customer behavior or consumer behavior during this time?
What's really been not just fascinating but heartening is that honestly, there has never been more interest, David, in consumer behavior in insurance. I mean, I said at the top of the call, my background, I'm a relative newcomer to insurance, and, consumer behavior was so critical in most other industries. But in insurance, you have so many other stakeholders. So you have a longer value chain. But now with the pandemic, it's not just our internal stakeholders that are interested in what consumers are doing, what are they going to do next with market volatility, with the stimulus checks, for example. But what they're doing, like all of us know on this, the 90 of us on this call and all our friends elsewhere, consumers are not rational. So for example, we had Kathy Fitzpatrick, who was on earlier. She's my partner in crime along with my team in this. But we found out that some consumers, we were hoping, because we're in insurance, that you would take your stimulus check and maybe put it to we actually thought, what everybody thought was, you'd buy necessities with it. We found that some people were donating it that was really hopeful.
Mm.
You know, we
Right.
also found that some people were using it for emergency savings, which we've talked about for a long time. And so what better sort of justification for innovation and insights and research than to show that consumers don't always think and feel in how business leaders want them to.
Fascinating. And Nick, what about you? What are you seeing?
I think it's as you said, it's the same thing, which is I think right now we're just seeing lots of changes, and what will stick is, well, who knows, right? Because I think some of it will depend on how long people live through these. You know, we know obviously the longer people live with any routine or behavior, it's going to become more habitual. I think one interesting thing has been, as we look at people spending more time at home, initially when we surveyed at the very beginning of the pandemic, you know, going back out to restaurants and bars and cinemas and stadiums and everything was top of people's list. And I think that's still, people definitely want to get out of their bubble and experience something different. I think, though, the one thing that's been interesting is we picked up from some of our consumer work is the longer that people have spent at home, there has become a new appreciation for home, right? They've invested in the home. They may have bought themselves a new home gym or a new TV or whatever it might be to make the home more of a cocoon. And so I don't think it's as simple as, well, people just revert back to normal, or that they will act in the way they think they will. I think also some of the investment they're making in the home will mean that some of those occasions will remain more at home because people have just gotten more used to it and they've invested that time. And then I did want to say one thing, Charity, on your son's breakfast lunch, because it did prompt a thing. Not judging at all.
It's the summer. Really hard to keep a schedule.
Believe me. But one of the things that's interesting is we've seen that breakfast in our tracking data used to be this very narrow focus thing, right? It was really focused to a couple of hours in the morning. And now breakfast stretches from like 6 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon. Yeah. And it's a much longer time frame. And so people are eating and drinking more in the morning and having longer breakfast, but also the composition of breakfast is changing. So people can be more indulgent some days, and they're adding more juices and smoothies and stuff to their breakfast. So again, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about how that will change, obviously, once people's, you know, if they have to start commuting again, or if they're commuting again or already. But it is interesting. Some of these changes, I think, will shift some of the mindsets that we're seeing with consumers. And then the last one I want to talk about was just because I think it would be odd for us not to talk about that. And you talked about it just now a little bit, Christina, is we're seeing a much stronger social consciousness coming through. Obviously, because of the pandemic and the economic fallout, but obviously also because of Black Lives Matter and the social injustice. And I think, you know, throughout all of this, we've seen consumers expecting brands and businesses to step up and to act, but also wanting to do more themselves and wanting to give their stimulus check and donate it to a food bank, or wanting to help a local community. And so I think that does give me hope. But again, I think it's a manifest shift that we're seeing in consumer attitudes and behavior there.
I think just to add quickly to that, it's a really good point, because you always have heard that, you know, consumers put their money, you know, where they, you know, where in their beliefs, I guess, or and want to support brands who sort of stand for something. I feel like, you know, initially it was sort of a thing of like, well, that's like millennials do that. Like not everybody's doing that or whatever. I think Edelman did a very interesting study on trust and showed, you know, how that varies across race and party lines as well. It's very, you know, interesting, fascinating. But to your point, Nick, it just helps us to understand kind of more where people are coming from. Everything that's happening right now, even with coronavirus, it's sort of like you don't know where people are.
Right.
And you need to understand that, like, not everybody's experiencing the same thing in the same way. And we really have to be mindful of that when we engage. And I think it's giving everybody the place to pause a little bit before you sort of, you know, voice a very strong opinion about something, because you just don't know where people are.
Agreed. What you need is a great insights team to help you navigate that.
That's right. That's right, of course.
We've got another good question in the question section of the app. First of which is from Richard. Hi, Richard. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Great discussion so far. I think we've kind of skirted around the edge of it a bit, but I wanted to ask a more direct question, which is about how far into the future you think we should be looking as insight professionals. So I think there's one challenge just to understand the now. I think that's a huge one. It struck me today in the supermarket, and I saw a stack of maybe 100 16-kilo bags of flour completely on sale, and it was like, no, we were doing bread making last month. This month we're doing this, and this. So I wonder, as professionals in your organisations, maybe it's different for different sectors, but how do you think about not just winning today and this week, but making sure you don't lose next month and next year? Where's your focus in that regard? Tough one.
Do you want me? So I think
It's a great question. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer this, but I think that's the literally billion-dollar question, right? I think when we've been looking at, so what we try to do is try and parse out the trends we're seeing into different, different levels of stickiness. There's some things like home meal making and bread making that, based on our social listening data and sort of applying a behavioral lens to it, you would say this feels like it might be more of a bubble than a long-term sticky trend, based on how easy is it, how accessible, how likely is it to be disrupted by something else that comes along. And then there are other trends we've seen, so things like some of the shift towards functionality, so people looking for functional beverages, which was already there before COVID, has just accelerated as a result. And you can see obviously some of the drivers of that. So what we're trying to do is leverage the observable data and then apply a human behavioral framework to it to say, how was this there before? Do we think that this is just a temporary acceleration, or do we think there's some fundamental attitudinal behavioral shifts underneath this that will continue to accelerate it? And so the answer, how far, I don't know. I guess it's as far as is practically possible, I guess.
I think this is not going to be a satisfactory answer, but I have seen trend data, consumer trend data, which shows that it's extended as time has gone on. I think there was an expectation that this was going to be a month, 3 months, and then it became 6 months from now, and more people saying that longer time horizon and less people saying, 3 months. So just, I wish, we could, yes, it's a $1 billion question, right? But I think that there's been this sort of like hope that things were going to, it's going to pass, right? Summer comes, it's going to be warm, it's going to be great, right? And that clearly hasn't happened. And I think that as this continues, that horizon just like the finish line just continues to move. Like I said, not satisfactory, but I report what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I agree with both Nick and Charity, and I think it's a great question. It's something that we struggle with and think about every day because, there are still some of the team that wonder when we can go back to our original agenda. A lot of those team members sort of signed up because that's what they thought they were going to be doing. We're doing something very different. So some of the things that we're trying to do, and we have not succeeded yet, but we're trying, is sort of looking back at, 2008 and seeing what happened, what did people do during, we can do that because we have the benefit of finances and having that data and the permission to store that data in aggregate. But we're looking to see if there's going to be any major seismic shifts that way that can then prompt our reaction for what we're going to do next. But, if I'm totally honest, we're literally living, one day at a time.
Any follow-up thoughts, Richard?
No, just to be grateful that everyone is in the same boat, that it's just this real challenge. You've only got, so many hours in the day and brain cells and pairs of hands in your team. So, it's a constant battle. And
I think to what Christina was just saying, I think the other challenge is this isn't this isn't a linear event; it's a dynamic event, and it's all interrelated. So there's so many, as we've been doing our trend prediction, there's so many, well, if, whens, but if this happens, then this happens, right? So you almost have to have less of a view of the future, more a view of possibilities of potential different routes that the future could take, which is hard for people to understand, but is honest, right? I mean, I think that's the honest world we're in right now.
Yeah, and accepting that we're not going to go back to the normal as it was completely.
Yeah, right.
I think we're pretty much all there now. So yeah, working out what's changing and how and what might go back. Great.
I'm going to borrow that.
Yeah,
view of
thanks so much,
possibilities.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
I love what Richard said about just knowing we're all in the same boat. I have to say that was one of the things I really took from the conversations we had in preparing for this event. It's like, oh, it's not just me. We're all in this together. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited to put this on in the first place. So yeah, great to hear that's helpful. I've asked Kirsty if she wants to come on because she asked a really thoughtful question. And as if by magic, we have 100% acceptance, by the way, when I've invited someone on screen. Thank you for keeping that hit rate up. Would you like to ask a question?
I would love to ask. I'd like to say I'm in my gym kit and I've got a dog beside me.
Aww.
So I'm just ticking a few boxes. Lovely to join you. No, I had a question when we were talking about people.
I relate. It's been doing that to me all afternoon. Crowdcast is not a fan of my computer, as Nick knows too.
Yeah.
So my question was really when we were talking about people spending more time at home and actually maybe rediscovering some of the pleasures and joys of activities in the home. Are you seeing differences by life stage? So by that, I mean, I think that there's a certain younger generation who are then desperate actually to get out again, to leave their home behind and to open the world up and whatever. And there's maybe, I don't know what age, I'm not putting ages on these, but there's a life stage where you're maybe beginning to be a bit more home-centered and you're realizing that you can have enormous pleasure and satisfaction in the home. Is that something that you're kind of looking at in your businesses?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a couple of factors that play into that aren't just age-based. I think it's a function of where you are in your life, how you've been impacted is a big factor in sort of how you engage in the world today as well, and where you live and what you're quote unquote allowed to do. So I think all of those things are sort of just, it's this very complex, combination of things that makes it difficult to prescribe wholly for one type of person, right? But I think it is a combination of, do you have kids? Because that's going to impact sort of like, are you going to get a pool or a play set or a bike and, that kind of thing? Are you going to move to the suburbs for more space? And then are you in an area that was impacted very hard in the beginning? And are you in an area that's being impacted really significantly now? And then the biggest thing that I'm seeing is if you know someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We did some modeling on an aggregate basis, basically of predicting every household in the US based on how likely they were to be, what the impact was likely to be on spending and their attitude towards going out. And you're absolutely right. It kind of comes down to means, motive, and opportunity, right? So opportunity, obviously, being how are you living in a place where there are still restrictions or where there's a new lockdown in place? But also exactly to what Charity was just saying, what we've seen is in areas even that are open now, but that went through the horrific first phase of the pandemic, like the Northeast or Washington State, there's much greater anxiety about kind of, I won't say going back to normal, but reverting to some of those existing behaviors. Even if I'm a 20-year-old Gen Zer who can't wait to escape, there's sort of like a psychological element around that opportunity. This means as well, like some people, we are in a lucky, privileged group, many of us, and we forget there's just lots of people who either have lost their job, have had to take a lower paying job, and so even if they wanted to behave that way, they might not be able to. And then there's also motive, which is sort of that another psychological, I guess, piece of it, which is we've seen from some of our segmentation work that we've done, which is, yes, there's sort of broadly an age dynamic, right? Sort of a sense of how threatened might I feel from a health perspective. A bit of countervailing that, there's often an economic issue the other way, which is younger people often being more affected by the pandemic. But then there's also this other piece, which is just how anxious do I feel generally? How safe do I feel about in my locale? And that just cuts across ages and socioeconomic groups. So it's less a, back to the good old insights answer to everything. It's more complex than we think, but it is almost like a more cellular view.
Yeah.
Right. Which is,
I think
I think generally what you're saying makes sense, and I think broadly is true, but then it goes back, each case is just a little bit different.
No, completely. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you, Kirsty.
Nice.
We've got a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to check if, what do we do to wrap it up? Maybe if there's one piece of advice you could give to researchers in this crazy time, what would it be? That's a good one.
I would say, just from my own experience, take a break from the COVID, because we sort of can't help ourselves but to be interested in what's driving behaviors and change and what's going to happen and what's going on. I feel like we're probably all sort of data nerds in that regard. Like, we kind of just want to know what the latest facts are in so many different ways. But I can tell you, and that plus, everything going on in the country and like everything else, it's a lot. So just take a break every once in a while.
Great advice. Who's next?
And this is going to sound counter to some of the things that we've been taught and told, but repurpose. That's what we found. Go back in there, and because it's sometimes it's hard. Budgets are changing. Being repurposed for other COVID realities that no one ever planned. And what we found is some things that we've done a couple of years ago that we've forgotten about, that we could dust up, go back and refresh, and there's still value in those. So that would be a tip that we've sort of had to resort to. Survivor. It's Survivor in the lab.
And then I think I'm just going to piggyback a little bit of what you said, Charity, which is taking from a different perspective. Although I do agree, giving yourself a break or giving your team a break is so important. I think another thing is just realizing, I think as insights professionals, we want to know the answer, and we believe there's an answer out there. And I think our businesses want an answer, right? They want a definitive answer to everything, right? What's my sales going to be next month, and how is consumer behavior going to change, and what do people want? And the reality is we don't know, and we can't precisely predict it. And I think a lot of us working in the industries that we do, we're sort of used to a world that was a little bit more predictable. We had past databases, we had models, we could, with some level of accuracy, predict what was going to happen based on some fundamentals. The fundamentals have all changed, and they are rapidly changing and dynamic. And so I think giving yourself a break as well to say, go back to what I was saying about the model before, is there will be no perfect answer to this. There will be no answer that is absolutely 100% accurate. You just have to give the best answer or the best prediction based on what you have available right now and what you know about consumer and shopper behavior, and allow for the irrational and allow for the fact that there's going to be change and dynamism. But the one thing that was interesting is I do think, at least in our organization, there's just now a different tolerance to that, because everybody accepts that is the case, right? No one is really expecting you to be able to give the perfect answer, because they know that's not really going to happen. So give yourself a break as well from getting to perfection.
Really liberating. Thank you so much. So all that leaves me to do is then to say a huge thank you to Christina, Charity, and Nick for giving their time to prepare for this and on the day. A huge thank you to everybody who asked a question, and to 100% of the people I invited randomly on screen for being brave and charitable and giving us your time to help move this along. We hope this was useful. It certainly was for me. I will have to watch this back to take notes because I was trying to be very present. But I want to do that. There was so much good advice here. And this is the first of the events we're running in the run-up to the market research event. There'll be more live leaders chats just like this, but on different topics coming up. The next one's going to be announced very, very shortly. And the first event as part of the market research event is September 1st on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a whole day on what that means for market research and the insights community in advance of the market research event, where we're going to have hopefully 1,000 or 2,000 people online sharing and learning, inspiring and challenging each other together. And if that's normally needed, then this year it's doubly or triply needed. I tell you what, I can't wait. So thank you to everybody. I really enjoyed it. Seems like the audience did. And we'll see you another one of these again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.